Cherokee Bill was part African American, part Caucasian, part Native American, and 100% outlaw. He wouldn't make it past the tender age of 20, but during the course of his short life, he was responsible for numerous robberies and killed at least 7 men, possibly many more. At the time of his arrest, he had a bounty of $1,300 on his head. When he was led to the gallows, he was asked if he had any final words. His reply was, "I came here to die, not make a speech." So join me as we go deep into the murky waters on this bad boy edition of Bloody Beaver Podcast. Cherokee Bill was born as Crawford Goldsby on February 8, 1876 at Fort Concho near San Angelo, Texas. He was the son of George Goldsby, a man of mixed African-American and white heritage, and Ellen Beck, also of mixed heritage, being part African-American, Cherokee, and white. So before we go any further on Crawford, aka Cherokee Bill, we're going to talk about his parents, because our parents have a huge influence one way or another on our lives. Like it or not, even if it's just a lack of parenting. Cherokee's dad, George Goldsby, was a Buffalo soldier. And no, I am not going to embarrass myself by attempting to sing Bob Marley's amazing 1983 hit, Buffalo Soldier. Just know that I really want to. George had a pretty interesting life, at least from what little we know of him. He was what was known in those days as a mulatto, and several articles I found online describe him as such. But I don't know anyone who actually uses that term nowadays. According to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, the term mulatto is a, quote, now offensive term used to describe a person of mixed white and black ancestry. So in other words, George was mixed. He was a biracial gentleman. And being born in 1843, that white ancestry didn't mean shit. He was part black, so that meant that he was born a slave. He was made a servant for the Confederate Army during the Civil War, just like Bass Reeves, who I covered way back on episode 2 of Bloody Beaver Podcast. I'm probably going to refer back to that episode a few times today, so if you haven't listened to it, just go check it out. A few parallels when it comes to Bass Reeves and George Goldsby. For instance, just like Reeves, George managed to escape from servitude with the Confederate Army. He made his getaway during the Battle of Gettysburg and found a job working as a teamster for the Union Army. He then enlisted into the Union Army under a false name and passed himself off as a white man, serving with the 21st Pennsylvania Cavalry. Like I said, George was mixed. His father was a white man and his mother was part white, part black. So it's entirely possible he was able to pass himself off as a white dude, who just happened to have a really nice tan. One person that this reminds me of is the actress Rashida Jones. You may remember her as Karen Filippelli on The Office or Ann Perkins on Parks and Rec. Her father is the famous producer and songwriter Quincy Jones, who happens to be an African-American gentleman. And her mother is a white lady. And I'm not in any way insinuating she's ever attempted to pass herself off as something that she's not. That's not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is just by looking at her, I never knew that she was part black. I thought maybe she was like an Italian or I don't know, maybe one of them Grecians, a Greek person. Looks are funny like that. I used to know a lady that was half black, half Asian, but she looked Mexican and she talked with a British accent. I knew a dude in high school named Tyrone who had red hair and spoke with a damn lisp. So yeah, life's funny. You can't judge a book by its cover. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is, while we don't have any pictures that I could find of George Goldsby, but this may have been the case with him as well. Some people, it's just hard to tell what their DNA makeup is. A Google search led me to a few articles that stated many slaves who were born light-skinned, after the plantation owners probably raped their mothers, were able to escape slavery and avoid arrest by passing themselves off as white. But after the emancipation, many of these escaped slaves would return to their African-American roots. And it was the culture that they most identified with. And that's exactly what Cherokee Bill's dad, George, did. After the war was over, George was mustered out and returned home. But I guess word got out that he served with the Union Army, and he heard rumors that he'd soon be lynched for doing so. Evidently, George's mama didn't raise no fool. He wasn't going to sit around and wait on a noose. He decided to head to a more friendly locale, the same place Bass Reeves headed to when he escaped slavery, Indian Territory. Once again, I'll go ahead and refer back to my Bass Reeves episode if you want to get a good idea of what Indian Territory was. But I'll just do a really quick rundown. Indian Territory is what we now call present-day Oklahoma. You've heard of the Trail of Tears. As European Americans started expanding west in the early 19th century, they clashed with the Native Americans. The natives in places like Georgia and Alabama were taking up space on prime farming ground. And then, due to a little something called the Indian Removal Act, thousands of Native Americans were kicked out of their homeland and forced to relocate to Oklahoma, known at the time as Indian Territory, in the 1830s. And these nations that were removed were known as the 5 civilized tribes: the Cherokee, Choctaw, Creek, Seminole, and Chickasaw. They were called civilized for a reason. They had already taken up a lot of the ways of the white man. They were farmers, many were educated. Hell, the Cherokee even had their own written language. Many members of these nations had converted to Christianity, and the dirty little secret that nobody wants to talk about is that they, just like the white man, were slave owners. We'll get to that in a moment, though. Civilized or not, they were forcibly removed from their homeland and made to relocate to a shitty piece of property now known as Oklahoma. And if you've ever known anybody from Oklahoma, you'll kind of understand what I mean. They're just not right up there. I personally think it might have something to do with the water, but I'm not a scientist, so, that's neither here nor there. I assume you've seen Tiger King, so we'll leave it at that. Shout out to Joe Exotic. Over the years, the Indian Territory became a safe bet for anybody who wanted to disappear, like in the case of Cherokee Bill's dad or the aforementioned Bass Reeves. It also became a lawless outlaw haven. Thieves and killers could strike out into Texas, Kansas, Colorado, or any of the neighboring territories, and then safely disappear back into the warm, welcoming bosom of Indian Territory. Cherokee Bill's dad, George, eventually left the territory and drifted on down to Texas, a much, much more superior state than Oklahoma. Write that down. He was a veteran, so he went back to what he knew. He enlisted in the 10th Cavalry Regiment and eventually attained the rank of First Sergeant. And that's not an easy task. This meant he must have been one hell of a soldier and had his shit squared away. It meant he was a leader of men, knew how to keep them in line and garner respect. The 10th Cavalry was formed in Kansas in 1866. At the time, all the enlisted men and NCOs were African Americans, many of whom were born into slavery. They soon earned the nickname Buffalo Soldiers. I don't know how true this is. It looks like there's some disagreement on how the name came about. Nobody knows 100%, but most sources do agree that the term Buffalo Soldier was given to them by Native Americans, supposedly because their hair reminded the natives of the dark curly hair that adorns the top of the heads of buffalo, the American bison, if you want to get all scientific on me. Another theory is that they were called Buffalo Soldiers due to wearing heavy buffalo coats in the winter. Either way, the name stuck. It wasn't easy being a Buffalo Soldier. All their equipment, including saddles and weapons, were just hand-me-down, worn-out shit that the white troopers no longer used. And they were treated badly, at times by other units. These men patrolled the Great Plains, engaging in battle with hostile natives, but they were never considered to be real soldiers by their peers. The Civil War, that great war fought to destroy the institution of slavery, was over. But the fight was nowhere close to being over for African Americans. All African Americans, Buffalo Soldiers included, were still treated as second-class citizens, as they would continue to be treated for many, many years to come. So back to George Goldsby. Some people hate the military and can't wait until their contract's over, but some people do actually thrive in that military life. And George appears to have been one of these people. He attained the rank of First Sergeant in just 5 years, which is a huge deal nowadays. From what little I know about military promotions, I feel like that's probably impossible to do nowadays, to climb the ranks that quickly, in modern times. Somewhere along the line, I'm not sure the exact year or location, George met Bill's mother, Ellen Beck. And like George, Ellen was also of a mixed racial background, part African American, part Cherokee, and part white. And this is where the 5 civilized tribes owning slaves come in. There were a lot of African Americans living in Oklahoma around this time that had Native American blood in them. The natives, just like the Southerners, were forced to free their slaves after the Civil War. Ellen was one of these freed slaves, known at the time by the collective term Cherokee Freedmen. Unfortunately for Ellen, as well as for young Bill, First Sergeant George Goldsby got into a little bit of trouble in 1878. There at Fort Concho, the tensions were getting high between the Buffalo Soldiers and the local cowboys and buffalo hunters. Things came to a head one day when some probably very drunk hunters and cowboys attacked one of the men at the tent. They ripped the man's chevrons and stripes off his uniform, a very, very disrespectful act. That man earned those stripes honorably as a member of the United States military. I would think that the majority of us nowadays would consider that akin to burning the damn flag. But you know how things be in the 1800s in Reconstruction, Texas. Once the soldier was able to escape, he made tracks back to the post and came back with his fellow soldiers, including First Sergeant George Goldsby. And they were armed to the teeth. As you can imagine, gunplay ensued. One hunter was killed and 2 others wounded, and one private with the 10th was killed, as well as another wounded. Texas Rangers investigated the incident and came on the post to attempt to arrest Goldsby, claiming that he was responsible. He was in charge and it was he who armed the soldiers. But Goldsby's post commander, Colonel Benjamin Gearson, refused to let them take the first sergeant, told the Rangers that they had no authority at a federal post. Nevertheless, Goldsby was understandably nervous. He had already escaped slavery in a noose once before and didn't have enough trust that the Army would be able to protect him, or even in how long they would be willing to protect him. Maybe the Rangers or some politician might put pressure on the post commander to go ahead and turn him over to the local law, in which case he would probably be lynched. After all, when everything was said and done, he was fully aware of his station in life. Respected NCO or not, he was a black man living in Texas in the 1800s. So he got out while the getting was good. Can't blame him there. He went AWOL and escaped into Indian Territory, the same territory he found refuge in years before. Only problem is, and the tragedy of the fact, while doing so he left behind his wife and young children, including a 2-year-old that will become known to the world as Cherokee Bill. Gotta wonder how different Bill's life would have turned out if only he had had his father around when he was growing up, especially a probably extremely strict, no-nonsense, military type of dad. Bill's mom, Ellen, once it became clear that her husband abandoned her, moved with her kids to Fort Gibson, Indian Territory, and left Bill in the care of an elderly black lady named Amanda Foster, who was known by all as Auntie Amanda. Bill lived with Auntie Amanda until he was 7 years old. No idea why his mom pawned him off on someone else. And I don't know if the other kids, his brother and sister, stayed with Auntie as well, or if they remained with his mother. and also no info on whether or not his mom visited him during this time. It's just an all-around shitty situation for young Bill. So really, as far as I can tell, you can't say that either one of his biological parents raised him. Both his mother and father were basically out of his life by the time he's 3 years old. No way he could have understood what was happening or be able to process these events at such a young age. Bill was sent away to an Indian school in Kansas at the age of 7. Then at the age of 10, he was sent all the way to Pennsylvania to attend the Carlisle School for Indians. I mentioned that school in my last episode I did on Tom Horn. Finally, at the age of 12, Cherokee was reunited with his mother. She was remarried by this point to another cavalryman, and Cherokee did not like his new stepdad. At one point, Bill told his mother, "I'm not going to call him dad ever, not even if there's a fire." And then he is quoted as following up that statement with, "He better not get in my face because I'll drop that motherfucker." End quote. Nah, I'm kidding. He didn't say all that, but Cherokee and his stepdad really did not get along. This is also around the same time that Cherokee started hanging out with the wrong crowd and started to buck authority. Maybe the stepdad was a good guy, but he just couldn't keep Bill in check. He had been without parental supervision and a father figure for far too long. He was already too wild. The wheels were already in motion. By the time Cherokee was 15, he had moved in with his sister and her husband. But once again, not a great respecter of authority, he and his brother-in-law just couldn't see eye to eye. Before long, he either left their home or got his mischievous little ass put out on the street. He moved back to Fort Gibson, Oklahoma, and moved in with a man by the name of Bud Buffington. Not making that name up, and started working odd jobs. Bud Buffington. Man, what a name. There's going to be a theme on this episode, as you'll soon hear. Lots of weird, seemingly made-up names in Oklahoma during this era. So much so that I actually checked multiple sources on some of these names to make sure that these were real people and I just wasn't, being trolled. But Bud Buffington sounds like a guy that, I don't know, had a successful career as, in his early years selling used appliances, and then somehow transitioned that into becoming a male stripper. But then, life kind of got in the way, and he developed a drug problem, did some time in jail, and now works for and, possibly is romantically involved with Joe Exotic. Bud Buffington, man. All right, ladies, hold on to your panties. Entering the main stage is the man who puts the buff in Buffington. The man who puts the B in BBC. Get those dollar bills ready for Bud Buffington. Let's make it rain. Cosmopolitan's half price for the next hour, and don't forget to visit the free buffet. So yeah, I'm assuming the real-life Bud probably wasn't the best of influences on young Cherokee Bill. Bill spent the next 2 years there in Fort Gibson until one day he almost let his bulldog mouth override that puppy dog ass. So before we go any further, let me just say, as with all the people I research, there's always a ton of conflicting info, and that's certainly the case for Cherokee Bill. Just keep that in mind. When he was just 17 or 18, he attended a dance. Some sources say that he was at the dance because he was smitten with a 15-year-old girl named Maggie Glass. But he wasn't the only one who had eyes on young Maggie. There was an older, bigger man there named Jake Lewis who didn't appreciate Cherokee trying to cockblock him. The two decided to throw hands, and Cherokee was easily overpowered and beaten by the older, more experienced man. Bill wasn't a big guy. There's a few pictures of him online if you want to check him out. Just Google Cherokee Bill. He's a good-looking kid, but while not tiny, he's definitely not somebody that you consider physically intimidating. There's one picture of him where he's got this little mischievous grin, and I don't know how to describe it, but it's one of those smiles that where you're like, oh, okay, yeah, definitely not going to let my kid have a sleepover at this kid's house. Got to make sure I don't set my wallet down around this damn juvenile delinquent. So yeah, Bill possibly got his butt whooped in front of a girl that he was crushing on, and that's always embarrassing. If that would have happened to me at that age, I would have gone home and listened to really sad music for several days. But not Cherokee Bill. The next morning, a furious Bill showed up at Jake's home with a pistol and shot him twice. So the other version of the story goes that Bill showed up at the dance looking for Jake because Jake had recently beaten up his little brother Clarence. And it was then that Bill shot Jake. Either way, Jake Lewis was at some point, for whatever reason, shot twice by Cherokee Bill. He survived the wounds though, but Bill didn't know that. He was under the impression that he killed a man, so he lit out for the territory, fleeing law enforcement. So now he's 17, maybe 18, and his outlaw career is about to begin. And if you've ever known a 17 or 18-year-old, or if you've ever been one, then you know that they're what I refer to as R-tarded. At that age, you're dumber than a box of rocks. If you're between the ages of 17 to 20 and listen to this podcast right now, just know that you're by nature a stupid motherfucker. But the catch-22 is you think you're smarter than everyone else in the world. All those dumbass old people that are trying to steer you in the right direction are stupid as fuck and don't know what the hell they're talking about. You've got life figured out, and they just don't realize how smart you are. And at the same time, you're filled to the brim with testosterone. You're growing hair in weird places. You're starting to smell funky. All you can think about is that elusive female vagina. I can assure you, it's a very confusing time. Anyway, this was 100% Cherokee Bill at this point in his life. But take that youthful naivety, some identity issues, as well as daddy issues, a penchant for violence, and for gravitating towards the wrong crowd, boom, You've got a powder keg waiting to explode. Once in the territory, Bill hooked up with the Cook Gang, led by Bill Cook. This group of outlaws terrorized the Cherokee and Creek nations during the early 1890s. They started off doing piddly shit like stealing horses and illegally selling whiskey to the natives, but before long, this led to train robberies, stage holdups, and even bank heists. The Cook Gang were all mixed, just like Cherokee Bill. They were of African American and Native American ancestry. Lost boys, not fully welcome in either society. They were young, angry, and ready to lash out at the world. And lash they did. In June of 1894, Cherokee Bill, while wanted for shooting Lewis, wasn't really that well known to law enforcement. But the law was certainly aware of the Cook brothers. A Native American law enforcement posse, led by Sheriff Rattling Gord, again, not making these names up, caught up with the gang and a fight broke out. During the fight, a deputy by the name of Sequoia Houston was killed, possibly by Cherokee Bill. On July 31st, 1894, the gang struck the Lincoln County Bank in Chandler, Oklahoma, and made off with $500. But not without difficulty. The gang shot several people, killing one of them during the robbery. They also lost a gang member during the fight. Law enforcement pursued them and caught up with them on August 2nd. During the fight that ensued, some deputies were severely wounded, and 2 members of the gang were killed and 1 was arrested. The rest, along with Cherokee Bill, were able to escape. And those who escaped had no plans to change their outlaw ways. By the way, I mentioned funny names earlier, so let's go ahead and take a look at the other members of the Cook Gang. You had guys such as Chicken Lewis, Buzz Lucky, Texas Starr, the Vertigus Kid, and my personal favorite, Skeeter Baldwin. I'll say it again, people. Where is my Wild West nickname? I've gotten a few suggestions, but, no offense, they all suck. Let's kick it up a notch. Anyway, around this time, Cherokee Bill is rumored to have shot and killed his brother-in-law. Once again, so many conflicting stories. I can't even really keep track of how many brother-in-laws Bill had, but I don't think it was the one that he clashed with as a young teenager. It appears that this guy's name was George Brown. And nobody agrees as to why Bill killed the man. One story says that they got into an argument over some stolen pigs. And if I had $1 for every time I've gotten an argument over stolen pigs, you know what I mean? The other story goes that Bill witnessed his brother-in-law beating his sister. So he walked up behind the man, blew his brains out. So much conflicting info. Some sources say he killed his brother-in-law at the age of 12. Some say it was in 1894. Was it over a hog, or was he protecting his sister? Who knows? It's likely that at some point Bill did shoot and kill one of his sister's husbands. But from what I can tell, nobody really knows the true story or when it happened or, whatever. We don't even really know how many people Cherokee Bill killed during his life. But most estimates puts it between 7 to 13 souls. He may have killed his first man at the age of 12, but I doubt it. The first man that he killed may have been a train conductor, and this was around the same time that he hooked up with the Cook Gang, when he was fleeing that shooting at that dance, trying to hook up with that young lady. Often with these Old West figures, especially the outlaws, it's really hard to separate fact from fiction. So, like I always say, who the fuck knows? All we know is that he was an angry young man who didn't place much value on human life, including his own. He and the Cook Gang continued to terrorize the Indian Territory. On September 21st, they hit the J.A. Parkinson and Company store and made off with a cool $600. Less than a month later, on October 10th, they really got the ball rolling when they held up and robbed the depot of the Missouri Pacific Railroad at Claremore. Less than 2 hours later, they robbed the railroad agent at Chateau, Oklahoma. 10 days later, these damn hoodlums ended up wrecking and robbing a Kansas City and Missouri Pacific Express 5 miles south of Wagoner. On November 8th, Cherokee and the gang rode into Lenapaw, Oklahoma and robbed the general store. When an innocent civilian named Ernest Melton walked in just to see what was going on, Cherokee Bill lifted his rifle and put a bullet in Melton's head, killing the man instantly. Cherokee was then able to dispose of Melton's body with the help of a Cook Gang groupie by the name of Carol Baskin. Baskin was a local eccentric who owned and operated a ranch nearby one of the Cook's hideouts. She was known to be in possession of several exotic cats, such as tigers and lions, and let's just go ahead and say she knew how to get rid of a body, okay? No, of course not. Let's stop being silly. Carol Baskin of Tiger King fame absolutely had no involvement with Cherokee Bill. Did she kill her husband and feed his body to tigers? No one can know for sure. Fuck yeah, she did. But did she dispose of bodies for Wild West outlaws? Absolutely not. Back to the story. So as y'all can see, Cherokee Bill, along with the Cook Gang, were definitely wreaking havoc on Indian Territory in 1894. And they were making a name for themselves. Everybody was after their little badasses. U.S. Marshals, the Native American police, the Texas Rangers were being called upon to assist. Even the U.S. military was gearing up to help hunt down the gang. After Cherokee killed Ernest Melton, U.S. Marshals tracked the gang down to their hideout. Once again, gunfire erupted. And once again, Cherokee Bill was able to slip away. However, most of the gang was arrested that day, including their leader, Bill Cook. This setback didn't slow down Cherokee Bill, though. No way, Jose. He kept on robbing. On New Year's Eve, 1894, he single-handedly took down a train station in Nowata, Oklahoma. And by this time, he did have a price on his head, $1,300, dead or alive. Money talks and bullshit walks. and there's very little honor amongst thieves. $1,300 would go a long ways back in the 1890s. So thus Bill was betrayed by some of his acquaintances who wanted part of that reward money, and he was captured without incident by law enforcement on the 30th of January, 1895. He was quickly taken to Fort Smith, Arkansas to stand trial for the murder of Ernest Melton, the guy he drilled through the head when he was robbing that general store. And he would be tried by the infamous hanging judge Isaac Parker. I've talked a little bit about Judge Parker before. He held court there in Fort Smith and tried to hang many a thief and killer that operated out of Indian Territory. All the U.S. Marshals who operated in the territory, including the ones who finally captured Cherokee Bill, worked out of Fort Smith. You know, guys like Bass Reeves. Shout out to episode 2 of Bloody Beaver Podcast. Or the fictional Rooster Cogburn, played by John Wayne in True Grit. Parker tried 13,490 cases. In more than 8,500 of these cases, the defendant either pleaded guilty or was convicted at trial. Judge Parker sentenced 160 people to their death, 79 of which were executed. And one of those who were executed was the young outlaw, Cherokee Bill. On February 26th, he was found guilty of murdering Melton. On April 13th, he was sentenced to death by hanging. During the whole trial and sentencing, he just sort of had a devil-may-care attitude, probably because he was planning on escaping. And then this little bad boy somehow managed to get a pistol smuggled into jail, which he would use on July 26, 1895, when he attempted to break out. This culminated in a gunfight, and Bill killed one of the guards and then holed up in the jail cell. This was a standoff situation. Bill knew that if he left the cell, he'd instantly be riddled with bullets. The guards knew that if they attempted to rush the cell, one or more of them would end up dead or wounded. Finally, another inmate stepped in, an outlaw even more notorious than Cherokee Bill. His name was Henry Starr, and I'm definitely planning on doing a podcast on him in the future. His name's on the list. Henry told the guards that he'd intervene if they promised not to shoot Bill on sight once he surrendered, which they were probably planning on doing. Henry was a seasoned crook, and he was about that life, so, he'd be knowing. The guards agreed, and Starr approached Bill and convinced him that there was no chance of escaping. Cooler heads prevailed, and Cherokee turned his pistol over to Starr. And this incident really assured that Bill would be hung. At the time, his lawyer was working on an appeal, maintaining that Bill had not received a fair trial in the court of Judge Parker, who had characterized Cherokee as a bloodthirsty mad dog who killed for the love of killing, and as the most vicious of all outlaws in Oklahoma Territory. And obviously, the appeal was overturned. I can't help but wonder if his lawyer would have been successful had Bill not killed that guard and tried to escape. He was hung on March 17th, St. Patrick's Day of 1896. 5 days before the execution, he met with Father Pius of the German Catholic Church there in Fort Smith for religious counseling. He would continue to meet with the priest every day after, leading all the way up to his death. On the morning of his execution, he woke up at 6 a.m. and ate a light breakfast. According to other prisoners, he was in a good mood. They could hear him whistling and singing. During the course of the day, he received visitors. His mother, his brother, a stepsister, the priest, and even Auntie Amanda came to see him. They all came to see their boy who went bad for the last time. Hangings in those days were a big event. Somewhere between 2,000 to 3,000 spectators crowded around the gallows to watch Cherokee Bill hang. Newspaper reports said the scene, quote, though not disorderly, was one of indescribable excitement. People were perched on stone walls and on roofs of nearby buildings, houses, and sheds. There were so many people crowding in to watch Cherokee die that one shed near the gallows collapsed under the weight of its crowd. As the time of his execution approached, Bill announced to the guards that he was ready to go at any time. He was accompanied to the gallows by his mother, Father Pius, and Auntie Amanda, as well as 4 guards. At one point, it's reported that he said, "This is as good a day to die as any." Once Bill was on the scaffold, he eyed the crowd. He saw his mother and said, "Mother, you ought not to come up here." To which she replied, "I can go whenever you go." Man, can you imagine having to witness your own child's execution? What thoughts were going through her mind at this time? Regret, maybe? That's when you start thinking about all the things you didn't do right. Maybe she blamed her ex-husband George for lighting out on him. Who knows? But I gotta imagine she was going through hell. Nothing like a mother's love. That kind of eternal love that forgives all wrongs, overlooks all shortcomings. Chokes me up sometimes. Moving forward. Once Bill was on the scaffold, the death warrant was read and Father Pius recited a short prayer. Bill stepped forward, his feet on the trapdoor. He was asked if he had any final words and replied, "I came here to die, not make a speech." His arms and legs were then tied and a black hood was placed over his head. At 2:13 p.m., he dropped in a fall of 6 feet. And luckily for him, his neck broke instantly. His death was a quick one. You can't say that Judge Parker didn't know how to properly hang a man. 12 minutes later, the ropes that bound Bill's limbs were removed, as were the handcuffs and shackles. 20-year-old Crawford Goldsby, a.k.a. Cherokee Bill, was dead. His body was placed in a coffin and taken later that day to Fort Gibson for burial, where it remains to this day. About a year later, Cherokee's little brother Clarence shot and killed Ike Rogers, one of the deputies that arrested Bill, possibly to avenge his brother's death. Clarence died young as well, at the age of 34. I couldn't find out how he died, but according to one news clipping I found, after killing that deputy, he joined the army and, quote, turned good. He died in 1911 and is buried next to his brother. Ellen Beck, Cherokee Bill's mother, died in 1932 at the age of 73, having already buried 2 of her sons. And no word on whatever happened to Bill's dad, George. I looked all over and I can't find any info. Once he escaped into the territory, I guess he, like many others, was just lost to history. Did he change his name and live a long life, or did that lynch mob finally catch up with him? We'll probably never know. So that's it and that's that. On a lighter note, for all you conspiracy theorists out there who think we may be living in a simulation, there is a little mystery involving Cherokee Bill when it comes to the number 13. A $1,300 reward was offered for his capture after killing Ernest Melton. His first death sentence was pronounced on April 13th. He killed Larry Keaton on July 26th, 2 times 13. The trial lasted for 13 hours. There were 13 witnesses for the prosecutors. The jury took 13 minutes to find him guilty, and he fell through the trap of the gallows at 2:13. So that said, my suggested song for this episode is 13 by Johnny Cash. Just YouTube Johnny Cash 13. It's a dark song about a man born into misery, destined to go bad. I feel like if Cherokee Bill were able to listen to it, it might resonate with him a little bit. Also, when I do research on these topics, a lot of the time, I'll YouTube whatever I'm researching just to see if there's any good documentaries out there, maybe find out a little bit more info. If you do a YouTube search on Cherokee Bill, the first video that pops up, titled Cherokee Bill, is a 3-minute and 38-second video, full of professionally filmed reenactments, as well as a lot of misinformation. It's fucking horrible. I rolled my eyes so hard watching that video that they damn near fell off the sockets. I'm not sure who made the video. It looks like it may be the History Channel or something like that, but don't waste your time. That's 3 minutes and 38 seconds you'll never get back. I'm obviously, as you can hear, in no position to mock anybody else's work. But seriously, man, they could have at least done a little bit of research. I'll tell you what I didn't roll my eyes at, though. The fourth result when you YouTube Cherokee Bill is called The Story of Cherokee Bill by Emily Cade. It's a video posted back in 2015 that 4 high school girls did for a history project. And it's fucking awesome. It's 110 times better than that professionally made video that I previously mentioned. You can tell the girls were just having fun and have a great sense of humor. I looked at the comments, and one of them is from Emily Cade, who posted the video. The comment reads, "It's 2018, and I'm mortified that this has over 500 views." Well, Emily, it's now 2020, and you're over 800 views. And thank you for the video. I was thoroughly entertained, and hope you and the other ladies are doing well. And all of you that are listening, do me a favor. Leave a positive comment on our video. I already did. And give it a like. The 10th Cavalry is still around today. Obviously, they're no longer segregated, and presently they are attached to the 3rd Armored Brigade combat team of the 4th Infantry Division at Fort Carson, Colorado. Back when they were still an all-black unit, they saw action during the Indian Wars, where 3 members were awarded our nation's highest award for valor, the Medal of Honor. They saw action during the Spanish-American War, where 5 more soldiers were awarded the Medal of Honor. They helped protect our southern border during World War I, when Yaqui natives, as well as German-advised Mexican troops, were making raids into the United States. They were eventually deactivated and then reactivated during the Cold War era. Soldiers of the 10th saw action in Vietnam and all the way up to the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. So shout out to all the brave men and women who've served in the 10th over all those years. And let me give a belated thank you to all those poorly treated black soldiers of the 19th century who served this country. A country that didn't care for them, and while doing so, probably pulled many a pasty white ass out of the fire. Thank you for your service. Shout out to Javier, living all the way down there in the Badlands of Colombia. Thank you very much for your recent comments. And as always, thank all of you who comment on my episodes or send emails. I love all the feedback and suggestions, so please keep them coming. You can email me directly at bloodybeaverpodcast@gmail.com or go to bloodybeaver.com and hit that contact button. You can subscribe to Bloody Beaver on YouTube and drop a comment on there as well. And if you're really feeling froggy, hop on over to iTunes and leave me a review. Not sure who or what my next episode's going to be on. I just checked my list and I've got over 60 more topics I want to cover. Some of them, God willing, will be short ones like this one. So much easier for me to record and edit shorter episodes. But there are longer episodes in the works, which I'm putting off because they're going to take forever. I want to do a long one on both Jim Bridger and Kit Carson, but I've got a lot more reading and research to do before I tackle those guys. I'm also planning on revisiting the Lakota and doing a 2-part episode. The first one's going to cover the Minnesota Massacre, also known as the Dakota War of 1862, in which 77 soldiers and between 400 to 800 civilians were killed by revolting Sioux war parties in Minnesota. And I want to follow up that episode covering the massacre at Wounded Knee, where 200 to 300 Sioux were massacred in 1890. I'm planning a long episode on Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce, as well as a long one on a guy you may have heard of named David Crockett, who died at a little place called the Alamo. So until next time, it is what it is and it be what it be. Hope you're all enjoying your quarantines. Speaking of quarantine, nothing really changed for me. I'm still working. But the one silver lining for those of you that aren't working or you're just stuck at home, man, what a great time to be stuck at home. Can you imagine how bad it would have been 20 years ago when we didn't have Wi-Fi and Netflix? So speaking of Netflix, because my podcast is for the people, because I care, I'm going to give y'all some of my top quarantine-worthy movies worth checking out on Netflix. So if you're really bored, listen up. Road to Perdition. Great gangster movie and highly underrated. Tom Hanks nailed it. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Go back to your roots. Can't go wrong with Clint Eastwood. Black Mirror. How have you not seen Black Mirror yet? I don't do drugs, but if I did, I believe Black Mirror would cripple my mind. And that's how good it is. Step Brothers. Come on. Blow. Red Dawn. Wolverines. Goodfellas. If you haven't seen Goodfellas, I don't know what's wrong with you. And speaking of monster movies, go ahead and give The Irishman a watch. Also on Netflix. What else? Hell or High Water. Great movie, great soundtrack. Monty Python and the Holy Grail. That movie's been cracking me up since back when I still wet the bed. If you're into stand-up comedians, you can't go wrong with Bill Burr, Ron White, or Dave Chappelle, all of whom have specials on Netflix. If you're into documentaries, then you probably already know that The Tiger King is all the rage. I just finished that the other day and decided to grow a mullet and get a Prince Albert. Mystic River is another great one. One of my favorite dramas of all time. Jeopardy. You can't go wrong with a little Jeopardy if you want to know just how stupid you are. The Office. Get it while the getting's good. It's not going to be on Netflix much longer. I personally know someone who watches the entire Office series 14 to 28 times a year. So there you go. Never have too much Office in your life. And Tremors is on Netflix. Man, that's a blast from the past. I remember back in the day, if we had a little bit of disposable income, my mom would take me to Jack in the Box on Friday nights. I'd get the sourdough jack with curly fries. And then we'd stop at a magical little place called Take One Videos. For those of you born before the year 2000, Take One Videos was the place you'd go to rent movies. It's like a walk-in Redbox. And that's where I first saw Tremors. I remember I used to eat all my curly fries before I got home, which is an amateur mistake, because then all you got left is the burger. So maybe around the age of 12 and a half or 12 and 3/4, I smartened up and exercised a little bit of self-control and left my fries alone till I got home. Then I got the full experience, the round the world as some people call it. I got the burger and fry combo together, enjoyed them as one, the way they're meant to be enjoyed. And that's what Tremors reminds me of. Lethal Weapons on Netflix, the first one, the best one. That was back before Mel Gibson lost his damn mind and wanted to kill all the Jews. Bloodsport? You fucking kidding me? The Kumite? If you're my age and have testicles and didn't think you were 110% going to grow up and fight in the Kumite, I don't even know what to do with you. Man, during that time, you had Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which is also on Netflix, and you had Bloodsport. Dude, I wanted to be Asian so bad back then. I was so dumb that I thought if you were Asian, you automatically knew karate. The Score is another great movie on Netflix, starring Robert De Niro, Edward Norton, and Angela Bassett's fine old ass. The Last Samurai is on Netflix. For any of my hetero-allergic friends who want to watch Tom Cruise get all oiled up and practice those dark arts with a bunch of young Japanese men. And last but not least, one of my favorite movies of all time, Taxi Driver. And that's all I got on movie suggestions. Stay safe out there, y'all. Here in Texas, everything is starting to open up. What a weird time to be alive. Strip clubs are opening up, with chicks dancing around in their Wuhan masks. The Karens of the world are out there snitching on anyone and everyone. Dr. Fauci and that old lady that wears scarves are both on the verge of a mental breakdown due to Trump rambling on about injecting people with disinfectants. Alex Jones is out there in Austin protesting and just acting all crazy. And then on top of all this shit, the United States government just released footage of UFOs. And nobody batted a fucking eye. That's how crazy this year is. And if you're in one of those states that are still on lockdown, I know it's gotta probably suck. Y'all can't even get a haircut. But I know for a fact that some of y'all are getting those back alley fades down the street of little Guillermo's house. And no, Guillermo isn't a, quote, licensed, quote, professional. But if you tip him right, he'll shave the damn Dallas Cowboys logo on the back of your head. And his grandma might even serve you up a nice plate of frijoles if you ask nicely. And I know some of you ladies out there are getting your damn nails done with Sharpie markers and dollar store glitter. Old Orange is the new black looking ass with your COVID-19 nails. Dude, I even saw a lady at the gas station the other day trying to wax her lips with a Band-Aid and rubbing alcohol. So yes, these are trying times. But don't let it get you down. Enjoy your lives. Call your mom and tell her you love her. It'll make her day. Be nice to everybody. And as tempting as it is, don't pull a Cherokee Bill and start robbing the Dollar General. Till next time.